Dr. Sarah Chun stared at the latest research data on her computer screen, her coffee growing cold as she absorbed the staggering statistics. The year was 2024, and her groundbreaking longitudinal study at Stanford University had just revealed what many in the psychological community had suspected, but few had dared to quantify. The average age of first pornography exposure had dropped to just 13 years old, with some children encountering explicit material as early as 8 or 9. The journey that led to this moment began 3 years earlier, when Dr. Chun, a clinical psychologist specializing in adolescent development, noticed a disturbing pattern in her practice. Young patients were arriving with increasingly complex sexual anxieties, unrealistic expectations about intimacy, and what she termed performative sexuality disorder, a condition where individuals felt compelled to recreate pornographic scenarios in their real relationships. The accessibility is unprecedented, Dr. Chun had explained to her research team during their initial meeting in 2021. We're not talking about magazines hidden under mattresses anymore. We're dealing with extreme content available 24/7 on devices that children carry in their pockets. The research team, led by Dr. Chun and including developmental psychologist Dr. Michael Rodriguez and neuroscientist Dr. Elena had secured funding from the National Institute of Mental Health to conduct the most comprehensive study of its kind. Their methodology was ambitious, tracking 5,000 participants across 5 years, from ages 12 to 35, monitoring their pornography consumption patterns, psychological profiles, and behavioral outcomes. What they discovered challenged conventional wisdom about sexual development. According to their findings, which aligned with recent studies published in the Journal of Adolescent Health, girls showed more negative attitudes towards pornography than boys who had an ambivalent opinion on the subject. However, both genders demonstrated significant psychological impacts from early exposure. Dr. Rodriguez, who specialized in adolescent brain development, explained the neurological implications. The adolescent brain is still developing, particularly the prefrontal cortex responsible for decision-making and impulse control. When exposed to highly stimulating sexual content during this critical period, we see alterations in neural pathways that can persist into adulthood. The study's most shocking revelation came from analyzing the participants' relationship patterns. Those exposed to pornography before age 14 showed significantly higher rates of sexual dissatisfaction, relationship instability, and what researchers termed sexual script confusion, the inability to distinguish between pornographic performance and authentic intimacy. Jessica Martinez, a 24-year-old participant in this study, exemplified this phenomenon. She had first encountered pornography at age 11 through a pop-up advertisement while researching a school project. "I thought that's what sex was supposed to be like," she confided during her interview. "It took me years of therapy to understand that real intimacy doesn't look like what I saw on those screens." The research team's findings aligned with international studies, including work from the Australian Institute of Family Studies and the American College of Pediatricians, which had documented similar patterns. The American College of Pediatricians reported that consumption of pornography is associated with many negative emotional, psychological, sociological, and physical health outcomes, including increased rates of depression, anxiety, acting out, and violent behavior, younger age of sexual debut, and sexual promiscuity. Dr. Chun's study also revealed a disturbing correlation between early pornography exposure and subsequent addictive behaviors. The research showed that individuals who began consuming pornography before age 14 were 3 times more likely to develop problematic pornography use patterns in adulthood, characterized by compulsive viewing, inability to control consumption, and significant de-stress when access was restricted. The implications extended beyond individual psychology. The study documented changes in social behavior, with participants reporting difficulties forming meaningful relationships, increased objectification of potential partners, and what Dr. Vasquez termed empathy erosion, a measurable decrease in the ability to understand and respond to others' emotional needs. As Dr. Chun prepared to present these findings to the American Psychological Association, she reflected on the magnitude of what they had uncovered. This wasn't just about individual pathology. It was about a generation whose understanding of sexuality, intimacy, and human connection had been fundamentally altered by unprecedented access to explicit content during their most formative years. The question that haunted her was simple yet profound. How do we help a generation navigate authentic human connection when their first teacher was a screen? Dr. Elena Vasquez adjusted the neuroimaging equipment as her latest research subject. 22-year-old David Park prepared for his third brain scan in the longitudinal study. David represented a crucial demographic, individuals who had developed what researchers were increasingly recognizing as problematic pornography use patterns in early adulthood. The brain changes are remarkable, Dr. Vasquez explained to her colleague Dr. Chun. As they reviewed the preliminary neuroimaging results, we're seeing patterns that mirror other behavioral addictions. Alterations in the reward system, decreased gray matter in areas associated with impulse control, and hyperactivation of the limbic system. The neurological research component of their study had yielded groundbreaking insights. Using functional magnetic resonance imaging, positron emission tomography scans, and diffusion tensor imaging, the team had mapped the neural pathways of 500 participants who met criteria for problematic pornography use. Their findings, which would later be published in the Journal of Neuropsychiatry, revealed structural and functional brain changes that persisted even after periods of abstinence. David's story illustrated the progressive nature of these neurological changes. He had first encountered pornography at age 12, initially viewing it weekly. By age 16, his consumption had escalated to daily viewing sessions lasting several hours. It started as curiosity, David explained during his psychological evaluation, but gradually, it became something I needed to function. I couldn't concentrate on schoolwork, couldn't sleep, couldn't even socialize without first satisfying this compulsion. The neuroimaging data supported David's subjective experience. Dr. Vasquez pointed to specific regions on the brain scan. See this area here. This is the nucleus accumbens, part of the brain's reward system. In David's case, we see the same dopamine dysregulation patterns found in substance addiction, tolerance, withdrawal, and craving. The research team's findings aligned with emerging international studies. A 2024 study published in the Journal of Behavioral Addictions had documented similar neural changes in problematic pornography users, particularly in areas responsible for executive function and emotional regulation. The Polish study mentioned in recent research showed that 12.2% of university students met the criteria for problematic pornography use, with 10.7% of all participants considering themselves addicted to pornography. Dr. Rodriguez, the developmental psychologist, had focused on understanding how these neural changes affected real-world behavior. His research with 200 young adults revealed a troubling pattern. Those with problematic pornography use showed significant deficits in emotional intimacy, increased rates of sexual dysfunction, and what he termed arousal addiction. The need for increasingly extreme content to achieve the same neurological response. The brain's plasticity, which normally serves adaptive functions, becomes maladaptive in this context, Dr. Rodriguez explained. The neural pathways strengthened by repeated pornography use begin to dominate other reward systems, making normal pleasures, hobbies, achievements, feel inadequate by comparison. The study's most significant finding concerned the phenomenon of sexual conditioning. Participants who had consumed pornography from adolescence showed measurable changes in their sexual response patterns. Their brains had been conditioned to respond to highly stylized, often aggressive sexual scenarios that bore little resemblance to authentic, intimate encounters. Maria Santos, a 28-year-old participant, described the real-world impact. I couldn't become aroused with my partner without recreating scenarios from pornography. Our relationship became performative rather than intimate. I felt like I was watching myself from outside, following a script rather than connecting with another human being. The neurological research also revealed concerning patterns related to impulse control and decision. Participants with problematic pornography use showed decreased activation in the prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for executive function, during decision. This finding explained why many individuals continued viewing pornography, despite recognizing its negative impact on their lives. Dr. Vasquez's team had also documented what they termed escalation patterns, the neurological basis for why individuals progressively sought more extreme content. The brain's habituation to dopamine meant that increasingly intense stimuli were required to achieve the same reward response, leading to consumption of content that initially would have been disturbing or unappealing. The implications for treatment were profound. Traditional talk therapy, while beneficial, needed to be combined with interventions that addressed the neurological changes. The research suggested that neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize and form new neural connections, offered hope for recovery, but required specific therapeutic approaches designed to rewire established pathways. Dr. Michael Rodriguez reviewed the behavioral assessment data from the study's third year, his expression growing more concerned with each statistical analysis. The patterns emerging from their research painted a picture of a generation whose social and sexual behaviors had been fundamentally altered by early and prolonged exposure to pornography. "We're not just seeing individual pathology," Dr. Rodriguez explained to his research team during their weekly meeting. "We're documenting a cultural shift in how an entire generation understands intimacy, consent, and human sexuality." The behavioral data from 3,000 participants aged 18 to 30 revealed alarming trends. Individuals with early pornography exposure showed significantly higher rates of sexual aggression, with 35% reporting having engaged in sexual behaviors they initially found uncomfortable or distressing, simply because they believed such acts were expected or normal. Ashley Williams, a 26-year-old study participant, exemplified these behavioral patterns. During her interview, she described her dating experiences. "I felt like I was expected to perform in ways that were painful or degrading. When I expressed discomfort, partners would act like I was prudish or inexperienced. It took me years to realize that what I was being asked to do wasn't normal or healthy." The research team's findings were supported by recent studies from the American College of Pediatricians and international research institutions. The documented behavioral changes included increased rates of sexual dysfunction, earlier sexual debut, higher numbers of sexual partners, and what researchers termed pornographic scripting. The tendency to recreate pornographic scenarios in real relationships without regard for partner consent or comfort. Dr. Chun's clinical observations revealed another disturbing trend: the emergence of what she termed pornography-induced erectile dysfunction. Among young men, we're seeing 20-year-old men who can't achieve arousal with a partner but have no difficulty with pornography, she noted. This represents a complete disruption of normal sexual development and function. The study's most comprehensive behavioral analysis focused on 1,000 participants who had been in relationships for at least 2 years. The data revealed that those with problematic pornography use patterns showed 60% higher rates of relationship dissatisfaction, 45% more frequent relationship conflicts, 70% higher likelihood of infidelity, 40% increased rates of sexual dysfunction, 55% more reports of emotional disconnection from partners. Jennifer and Mark Thompson, a couple who participated in the study, illustrated these statistics. Both had been exposed to pornography in their early teens, and their 5-year relationship had been marked by sexual difficulties and emotional distance. "We were both performing rather than connecting," Jennifer explained. "Our intimacy felt scripted, like we were following a playbook rather than exploring our own connection." The behavioral research also documented the impact on parenting and family dynamics. Parents with problematic pornography use showed decreased emotional availability to their children, increased rates of divorce, and what researchers termed generational transmission, the likelihood that their children would be exposed to pornography at similarly young ages. Dr. Rodriguez's team identified several key behavioral patterns that distinguish problematic users from those with healthier relationships with sexuality. Escalation patterns. 80% of problematic users reported needing increasingly extreme content to achieve arousal, often progressing to material that depicted illegal or harmful acts. Objectification behaviors. Participants showed measurable increases in objectifying attitudes toward potential partners, viewing others primarily as sources of sexual gratification rather than whole human beings. Consent confusion. Many participants demonstrated poor understanding of consent, often assuming that behaviors depicted in pornography were universally acceptable without explicit agreement. Performance pressure. Both men and women reported feeling pressured to perform sexually in ways that mimicked pornographic content, regardless of personal preference or comfort. The study's longitudinal design allowed researchers to track how these behaviors evolved over time. Participants who received intervention showed significant improvement in relationship satisfaction and sexual function, while those who continued problematic use patterns showed progressive deterioration in multiple life domains. The research team's work was gaining international attention. A randomized clinical trial at Utah State University, based on acceptance and commitment therapy, resulted in a 92% reduction of pornography viewing following 12 treatment sessions, with 54% of participants ceasing viewing completely. These findings suggested that while the behavioral impacts of pornography were significant and widespread, the neuroplasticity of the brain meant that new, healthier patterns could be established with appropriate intervention and support. Dr. Sarachun stood before the American Psychological Association's annual conference, presenting what would become known as the Stanford Protocol, a revolutionary treatment approach for pornography addiction that combined neurological understanding with behavioral intervention. The packed auditorium reflected the growing recognition that this was not a fringe issue but a mainstream mental health crisis affecting millions. Traditional addiction models are insufficient. Dr. Chun began her presentation. We're dealing with a unique form of behavioral addiction that hijacks the brain's reward system during critical developmental periods. Our treatment approach must address both the neurological changes and the behavioral patterns result from prolonged exposure. The Stanford Protocol emerged from 4 years of clinical trials with 800 participants. The treatment combines several evidence-based approaches: cognitive behavioral therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, mindfulness-based interventions, and, what the team termed, neural pathway reconstruction. Specific exercises designed to rebuild healthy reward responses. Dr. James Mitchell, the protocol's first success story, had volunteered for the clinical trial after years of failed attempts to control his pornography consumption. I had tried everything, he explained during his testimonial. Support groups, willpower, even trying to exhaust myself with exercise. Nothing worked until I understood that my brain had been fundamentally changed by years of use. The treatment protocol's first phase focused on neurological stabilization. Participants underwent a 30-day neural reset period, during which they abstained from all pornographic content while engaging in specific activities designed to restore normal dopamine function. This included regular exercise, meditation, creative pursuits, and social connection activities that provided natural reward responses without the artificial stimulation of pornography. Dr. Elena Vasquez's neuroimaging research had shown that this initial phase was crucial. We can actually see the brain beginning to heal, she explained. The hyperactivated reward pathways start to normalize, and the prefrontal cortex begins to regain its regulatory function. But this process takes time, typically 60 to 90 days for significant neurological changes. The second phase addressed the behavioral and psychological aspects of addiction. Dr. Rodriguez's team had developed specific interventions for the relationship difficulties that characterized problematic pornography use. Participants learned to recognize the difference between authentic intimacy and pornographic performance, developed healthy communication skills, and practiced what researchers termed mindful sexuality. Lisa Chun, a 29-year-old participant, described the transformation. I had to learn how to be present during intimate moments with my partner. I realized I had been disassociating, watching myself perform rather than experiencing connection. The therapy taught me to stay in my body and connect with my emotions. The protocol's third phase focused on relapse prevention and long-term recovery. This included developing coping strategies for triggers, building meaningful relationships and activities, and what the team called purpose reconstruction, helping participants reconnect with their values and life goals beyond sexual gratification. The treatment's effectiveness was remarkable. After 12 months, 78% of participants had achieved sustained abstinence from pornography, with 85% reporting significant improvements in relationship satisfaction and sexual function. The neuroimaging data supported these self-reports, showing measurable improvements in brain structure and function. International adoption of the Stanford Protocol was swift. Treatment centers in Australia, the UK, and Canada began implementing the approach, with similar success rates. Cognitive behavioral therapy was emerging as the most effective technique for patients addicted to pornography, and the Stanford Protocol's integration of multiple therapeutic approaches was setting new standards for treatment. The protocol also addressed the unique challenges faced by adolescents. Dr. Chun's team had developed a modified version for teenagers that involved family therapy, school-based interventions, and peer support groups. The adolescent program showed particular promise, with 90% of participants showing significant improvement within 6 months. Early intervention is crucial, Dr. Chun emphasized. The younger the individual, the more plastic their brain, and the more responsive they are to treatment. We're essentially helping them develop healthy neural pathways before maladaptive patterns become entrenched. The treatment revolution extended beyond individual therapy. The research team had developed educational programs for schools, training materials for healthcare providers, and advocacy efforts to increase awareness of pornography addiction as a legitimate mental health concern. The Stanford Protocol's success had also inspired policy discussions. Lawmakers were beginning to consider legislation requiring age verification for pornographic websites and mandating mental health education about pornography's effects in schools. By 2024, the conversation about pornography's effects had shifted from whispered concerns to mainstream discourse. Dr. Sarah Chun found herself testifying before Congress, her research data projected on screens, as lawmakers grappled with the implications of what she termed the greatest uncontrolled psychological experiment in human history. Senators, Dr. Chun addressed the Senate Judiciary Committee. We are witnessing the first generation to grow up with unlimited access to extreme sexual content during their most formative year. The societal implications extend far beyond individual psychology. We're seeing changes in crime rates, relationship stability, birth rates, and social cohesion. The societal awakening had begun with grassroots movements. Parents like Catherine Morrison, whose 14-year-old son had attempted suicide after developing severe pornography addiction, had organized into advocacy groups demanding action. I lost my child to something that's considered normal teenage behavior, Morrison testified. We wouldn't give children unlimited access to alcohol or gambling, but we've given them unlimited access to content that's equally addictive and harmful. The research data supported these parental concerns. Dr. Chun's latest societal analysis, based on correlational studies across 15 countries, revealed disturbing patterns. Nations with higher rates of pornography consumption showed 40% higher rates of sexual violence, 35% decreased birth rates, 50% higher divorce rates, 60% increased rates of sexual dysfunction among young adults, 25% higher rates of depression and anxiety among adolescents. The economic implications were staggering. The pornography industry, worth an estimated $97 billion globally, was creating externalized costs that society was only beginning to calculate. Dr. Rodriguez's economic analysis suggested that the healthcare costs associated with pornography addiction, including treatment for sexual dysfunction, relationship counseling, and mental health services, exceeded $30 billion annually in the United States alone. The workplace implications were equally significant. Dr. Chun's research, 500 companies revealed that employees with problematic pornography use showed 35% lower productivity, 50% higher absenteeism rates, and 40% higher turnover. We're not just dealing with individual suffering, she explained to corporate leaders. This is affecting our economy, our competitiveness, and our social fabric. The educational system was also grappling with the implications. Sarah Martinez, a high school counselor, who had participated in the Stanford team's educational research, described the changes she had observed. I'm seeing 15-year-olds who can't concentrate in class because they're thinking about pornography. I'm seeing girls who think they have to perform sexually to be valued. I'm seeing boys who can't form normal relationships because they see women as objects for gratification. The research team's educational interventions were showing promise. Schools that implemented comprehensive pornography literacy programs, teaching students about the unrealistic nature of pornographic content, the risks of addiction, and the importance of healthy relationships, showed significant improvements in student well-being and academic performance. Religious communities were also adapting their approaches. Father Michael Sullivan, a Catholic priest who had worked with the Stanford team to develop faith-based treatment protocols, explained, "We're seeing unprecedented numbers of young people struggling with this addiction. Our traditional approaches to sexual morality aren't sufficient. We need to understand the neurological and psychological aspects of addiction to provide effective support." The legal implications were complex. Some jurisdictions were implementing age verification requirements for pornographic websites, while others were considering classification of pornography as a public health hazard. The debate centered on balancing free speech rights with public health concerns, particularly regarding the protection of minors. Dr. Vasquez's latest neuroimaging research had revealed that the effects of pornography on the developing brain were more severe than previously understood. "We're seeing changes that persist into adulthood," she explained to the medical community. "The implications for an entire generation's capacity for intimacy, empathy, and healthy relationships are profound." The societal response was beginning to coalesce around several key initiatives. Public health campaigns, similar to anti-smoking campaigns. These efforts aim to educate the public about pornography's health risks. Technology solutions. Companies were developing filtering software and parental controls to limit access to pornographic content. Educational reform. Schools were implementing comprehensive sexuality education that included discussion of pornography's effects, treatment expansion. Healthcare systems were recognizing pornography addiction as a legitimate mental health condition requiring specialized treatment. Policy development. Lawmakers were considering legislation to regulate the pornography industry and protect minors from exposure. The societal awakening was not without controversy, but the mounting evidence was difficult to ignore. 5 years after beginning her groundbreaking research, Dr. Sarah Chun stood in her Stanford laboratory, reviewing the final data from the most comprehensive study of pornography's effects ever conducted. The numbers told a story of both crises and hope. A generation damaged by unprecedented exposure to extreme sexual content, but also evidence that recovery and prevention were possible. We're at a crossroads, Dr. Chun reflected during her final team meeting. We can continue to pretend this isn't happening, or we can acknowledge that we've conducted a massive psychological experiment on our children and work to address the consequences. The Stanford team's 5-year longitudinal study had tracked 5,000 participants and generated over 200 peer-reviewed publications. Their work had influenced policy in 12 countries, led to the establishment of specialized treatment centers worldwide, and fundamentally changed how mental health professionals understood behavioral addiction. The path forward required a multifaceted approach. Dr. Chun's team had developed a comprehensive blueprint for societal response. Prevention through education. The most promising intervention was comprehensive sexuality education that included pornography literacy. Students who received this education showed 70% lower rates of problematic pornography use and significantly healthier relationship patterns. The curriculum taught young people to recognize the difference between pornographic performance and authentic intimacy, understand the addictive potential of pornography, and develop skills for healthy sexual expression. Treatment revolution. The Stanford Protocol had evolved into a sophisticated treatment system that addressed the psychological and social aspects of pornography addiction. Treatment centers using these methods reported 80% success rates in helping individuals achieve sustained recovery. The protocol's integration of individual therapy, group support, family involvement, and neurological rehabilitation represented a new paradigm in addiction treatment. Technology solutions. The research had spurred development of sophisticated filtering and monitoring technologies. These tools, combined with education about their proper use, were showing promise in preventing childhood exposure while respecting adult autonomy. The key was implementing these solutions before problematic patterns developed. Policy and regulation. Several jurisdictions had implemented age verification requirements for pornographic websites, leading to significant reductions in adolescent exposure. Studies showed that only 57% of children reached out to someone after exposure to pornography, leaving many youth to grapple with the experience alone. This data had motivated policies requiring schools to provide support resources and trained counselors who could recognize signs of problematic use. Cultural shift. Perhaps most importantly, the research had contributed to a cultural conversation about healthy sexuality. Communities were beginning to reject the normalization of pornography and instead promote relationships based on mutual respect, emotional connection, and authentic intimacy. Dr. Rodriguez's follow-up research with recovered participants provided the most encouraging data. Individuals who had successfully overcome pornography addiction showed remarkable improvements, not just in sexual function and relationship satisfaction, but in overall life satisfaction, career success, and psychological well-being. Recovery isn't just about stopping problematic behavior, he explained. It's about reclaiming one's capacity for authentic human connection. The research team's work was inspiring similar efforts worldwide. International collaborations were studying cultural variations in pornography's effects, developing culturally appropriate interventions, and sharing best practices for prevention and treatment. Young people who had participated in the prevention programs were becoming advocates themselves. Marcus Johnson, now 22, had been exposed to pornography at age 12. But received intervention at 16. I want other kids to know they don't have to struggle alone, he explained. There's help available, and recovery is possible. The path forward also required addressing the root causes of pornography consumption. Dr. Chun's research had identified loneliness, trauma, and lack of healthy relationship models as key risk factors. Comprehensive approaches needed to address these underlying vulnerabilities, while providing alternatives to pornographic consumption. As Dr. Chun prepared for her retirement, she reflected on the transformation she had witnessed. When we started this research, Pornography addiction wasn't even recognized as a legitimate condition. Now we have evidence-based treatments, prevention programs, and a growing awareness of the need for action. The final message of the Stanford team's work was one of hope. While pornography had caused significant harm to individuals and society, the human capacity for healing and growth remained intact. With proper understanding, intervention, and support, individuals could recover from pornography addiction and develop healthy, fulfilling relationships. The path forward was clear. Acknowledge the problem, implement evidence-based solutions, and prioritize the well-being of future generations over the profits of an industry that had caused immeasurable harm. References and sources. This narrative is based on extensive research from peer-reviewed journals, clinical studies, and reports from major health organizations including the American College of Pediatricians, the Australian Institute of Family Studies, Utah State University clinical trials, and numerous international research institutions studying the psychological and neurological effects of pornography consumption.